Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the functionality of the BasicOverrig script, which you can see over here. At first I'm going to show you the actions, or the functionality rather, of this script on simple objects in a simple example, and then I'll give you a more practical example in a particular animation. So let's start. Before looking at the script itself, I'm going to tell you what is the actual purpose of this script. You see, the animator's work consists of two large parts. It's the artistic component, artistic part, and the technical part, the technical component. Of course, we can talk about the artistic part. It's very subjective and it's connected to principles of animation and such. But when it comes to technical aspects of work, there are a lot of things we can optimize and can make simply better by using this script. Because there are a lot of problems that animators face constantly, of course some more, some less. Animators constantly face problems like why is this part of my animation is shaking, how can I fix it, I have a budget and how can I rig it effectively in order to use it with my animation, how much convenience can I have in order to animate something, how can I animate maybe clothes, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of kind of things and issues animators are constantly encountering. Let's begin and let's take a look at buttons and functions which can be used in this script. The first script, or the first button rather, it's actually one of the most important buttons and functionalities in this script, because it's one of the most usable, and all the other functions are based around this button, this script. It's the not function, not button. So how can we use it? Let's say we have some kind of animations. Maybe we have two objects like this. The cube is attached to a sphere in a hierarchy. In a cube, we don't have any kind of animations. You may have it, may not have it, doesn't matter. And let's say you need to change maybe cube's animation or sphere's animation in order to, and you need to remain the animation for the second object intact, so in order for it to remain the same. Let's say I want to move my sphere down, but I want the animation of the cube to be the same, to remain the same. I'm selecting the cube, pressing the Not button, and you see the animation will be transferred and is transferred to an external locator, external object. We can make it actually quite bigger for the visual convenience. And essentially that's it. Now I have a cube, and it's independent from the main animation. You see that the hierarchy actually remains the same, but if we take a look at the cube itself, it is actually attached to an independent object. And now we can take this object, let's say maybe we can remove these animations, these unnecessary animations. Yeah, maybe these keys. You see that it stops moving. Or we potentially can do the opposite. Maybe we can do something with a sphere. Maybe there is a simple sine wave. Let's maybe move it like this. Yeah, I'm using animation layer to move this object to the side, maybe like this. You see the animation remains the same, the movement of the cube was unchanged, and it works as predicted. After we've made necessary corrections, we should rebake our animation back to the original object. For that, we're going to select the cube. We can either do it by hand, or we can actually use the selector over here. It selects the source object for the last operation that we applied. And the one button selects the object that was created during the last operation. Or in case, let's say, if you had a lot of operations, so you actually used the script a few times, you can select the locator. Then you can press the Select Constraint button. And this is going to select the object to which this operation was applied. Alright, so we select the object, the necessary object, and then click the Bake button. You can see that we also have the Bake to Layer button, so you have a few options. You can actually bake the animation to the original layer, to the Bake animation layer, or you can bake it to the separate layer. You can do it in order to maybe iterate with this animation layer, maybe change the effectiveness of this animation layer, change sort of opacity of this animation layer, so to speak. Now we can see that something was baked. Let's take a look at what we have right now. We don't need locator anymore, so animation is ready, it is baked. You see that animation was changed according to our changes we've made. You can see right now that we have new animation curves, new animation as it is. Maybe as my next move, I want to change the cube's animation. Maybe I want to make it stand still during the sphere's animation at some moment. Again, I'm applying the node to my target object. Of course, instead of that, I could maybe in my case delete some keys or something like that. But personally, I don't want to do it because it is simply not very comfortable way to work in a graph editor. Now I can just create a new layer with this new locator selected. And let's say we can add in a key over here. Then I'm going to select the time range. And now in this time range, my animation will remain the same, will remain still, if I press this button. And then somewhere here, I'm going to set the 0 key in order to get out of this animation layer. You see what happens. And why is it effective? Well, first of all, it's very easy and quick way to work. Instead of deleting keys, fixing curves and stuff like that. And secondly, you can undo this layer. You can maybe decrease its effectiveness by half or any other degree, any other number. Or as an alternative, you can actually key the animation layer itself. Maybe you can turn off this animation layer at some point, then you can turn it on at some point of your animation. Maybe over here is going to be 1. And somewhere here, again, I'm disabling this animation layer, just setting it to 0. And we consider the result. It's very smooth interpolation between active animation layer and a disabled animation layer. Then I'm selecting the source, this cube in this case, baking the animation. Let's bake it actually to the separate layer. After that, I can remove the locator. It's necessary. It's actually necessary to do. And as a result, we have a separate animation layer with the animation that we've created. You see, we can turn it off, turn it on if necessary. We can play with a slider just to change our animation. It's very easy and very iterative. It's non-destructive. It's actually one of the most important parts of this entire workflow. Alright, so I've shown you some simple objects, how to apply the script to simple objects. Let me show you how to use this script with the real animation. How is it applied, how does it work, and how is it very helpful. Alright, let's say right here we have a real animation. It's very simple animation, it's a simple case for using this script, but it's still a simple production-ready animation. Over here, my animation is being moved in space using the main control of this rig for this character. And there is an animation inside, so we kind of see a typical walk cycle. But sometimes, in some places, you can see that we have sliding in our feet. Over here, for example. How can we fix it? I'm going to select the leg control, apply the node, and it's done. Now I can select this new node that was created, this new locator. You'll see that this object, this new locator, is outside the main hierarchy with the baked animation from our main animation. Alright, so I see I'm going to use translate Y over here. I can select this problem. That's essentially the shaking, the sliding of our feet. I can select these keys, delete those. And of course I can then fix the curve itself. Just move it like this. And you can see that it fixes the problem with the sliding feet. It's a valid approach, but it still takes some time. I prefer doing it in a bit different way. Let me show you. It goes beyond the usage of the BasicOverrig script, but just kind of for your information. It's better to use animation layers for this type of work than to clean up curves. We can take this locator, add it to the animation layer, set a key, right on this pose where we have this sliding issue. Essentially, I want to make this pose static in this moment. Then we can select the time range in which this foot should remain static. Then I press this button. Of course, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself slightly. Essentially, what this button does is it sets the same value in the selected time range. It's the same value key in the selected time range. From the first selected frame to the last selected frame. I'm going to press it. We'll see we have these new curves. And effectively it creates counter movement to this sliding issue, and as a result we have no more sliding. And then somewhere around over here we can set a 0 key in order to get out of this animation layer, in order to avoid problems. And there it is ready. Now you can see the foot isn't sliding, it's fine. It isn't shaking, everything is great. Then I'm going to select the object with this animation layer. I'm going to merge this animation layer. Then I'm going to select the leg again, bake the animation. It is done. Then I can remove the locator. The next button that I'd like to talk about is called Not Offset. So essentially it's the same as the last one, but with an offset. Again, we have the same animation. I'm going to select the object. And now I'm going to apply the not offset, and we can take a look at the object that was created. You see we have nothing on this object. We can move this object, let's say somewhere around here, maybe yeah, right here at the corner of this cube. Then I click on an empty space. Essentially I'm deselecting everything, or clearing the selection. After that, the animation on the cube will be recalculated to this object with an offset. Now we can take this object. Again, we can use the animation layer for this. Maybe we can move it, we can rotate it, we can add some kind of new animations around this new object, which effectively serves as a pivot point for this object. You can see that the cube is still in hierarchy. And this newly created locator is outside the hierarchy. Of course, it works not only with one selected object, so you can effectively select several objects, apply not offset. You can place these locators, these new locators in any place. You also should remember that you have to have at least something selected, and once you deselect the object, it's going to recalculate and rebake the animation to these objects. Another important part is that when it comes to working with cartoon animations, when you may be animating a shot for a cartoon, there is always a case when you simply don't have an empty space to click on, because they work with a lot of geometry in the complex scenes, like with a million different controllers and so on and so forth. For that, you can use this button, deselect. You just press it. Then it's gonna recalculate everything as usual, and it works as expected. Now we have two objects which are independent from each other. We can reanimate these objects, we can move it, can rotate it using these new pivots. Next, let me show you how we can use this not offset function, this not offset button, with the realistic animation. You see we have animation where some kind of ogre is hitting the ground with his club. And say I want to correct the position of his hand, this hand. And I want to correct the position relative to the club itself, because right now the hand is maybe twisted a bit too much. I'm selecting the hand's control, then I am applying the not offset. Then I'm offsetting this locator to the place where I should have a pivot. So essentially the center of rotation in this case. In this case, it's in a place where the character holds his club. And then what else you can do? It's a sort of undocumented feature or possibility, so to speak, which you can use effectively. Until you deselected the object, until it is recalculated and rebaked, you can do the following. Using Shift, I'm selecting the control of this club object. Then I'm pressing the P button, parent function. It is right over here, this one. So I'm parroting this locator inside the club's control. Then I can zero out the rotations and maybe translations, maybe mainly rotations in order to get the locator oriented the same way as the club. Then I'm clicking on empty space, and after that my animation is going to be recalculated based on this object, which is inside the club control. Now I can rotate this object if needs be. You see what we have right now. So effectively I can control the hand using this new pivot. And if I needed to fix it in a traditional way, I should have selected the control, then move it like this, then rotate it like this. So you can see that it's very inconvenient and it leads to some problems. And of course, then we can switch to animation layers, create a layer, and animate this as we see fit. Maybe like this, maybe over here it should be rotated something like this, and so on and so forth. Well, in this case, there is nothing to correct because the animation itself is fine. Because this animation was actually created with this node functions, with this OverRig script. It is especially helpful with the knockback of the club when it hits the ground. Everything was done with this script. The next button I'd like to talk about is not Orient button. This script is intended to save the rotation of any kind of object. In order to illustrate you this functionality, let's say right here I have this animation again, and I want to rotate this object so that the rotation of this inner one doesn't change. Please pay the close attention. I want to change the position, but I don't want to change the rotation. I'm going to press the not Orient, and then animate as we see fit. You can see that it works in very similar manner as the aim or actually Orient constraint. Then I'm going to bake the animation after it is done. You see it is done. Then let's apply it to the real animation, real example. Let's say we have the same example as we had with the club, with the troll. I have previously showed you that we had a system in our left hand, our left arm, that I've attached the not offset. Then I rotated my hand around the club, around the handle of this club. Let's say I want to take it further. Let's say I want to change the animation, to tweak maybe hands in some way. Maybe what I want to do is to make him hold his club more like this, like this maybe. So when he hits the ground, it should be like this maybe, to make it more twisted. But you see that my hand has some problems because of that, so I would be forced to counter-rotate my arm in order to fix this problem, and so on and so forth. So there will be some additional steps, and it would be quite time-consuming. What can I do instead? I can select the not offset that we've created previously, and then I'm going to apply the not orient to this not offset. I'm going to make it slightly bigger, just for convenience. And you see what happens. Now I can correct the hand using the separate animation layer. You see that the left hand continues to move with the club. Over here you can see it. It keeps moving with the club, but it doesn't rotate with the club. So I'm going to take it. Gonna move it like this, so he holds the club, strikes, and in this time range I'm gonna make some tweaks in order to change the animation. Yes, something like this. And of course I can make changes in any stage of this animation. Maybe I can add in some new rotations, some additional twists, maybe in order to simulate some kind of internal reaction from the heat or something like that. Like this. And using only animation layer for that. Then when he hits the ground, and yeah, something like this, and essentially, yeah, that's it. I've adjusted the animation. Also, please note an interesting point. You may have noticed that I haven't applied the knot Orient directly. But of course, I could have done that. I could have applied the animation directly to some kind of object, then tweak it in some manner, in some formal manner. But it shows you how I can essentially combine two functions, two scripts, so meaning not offset and not orient, in order to achieve more complex behavior and fix or adjust your animation far easier than it could have been. As a result, we have these two knots which allow us to move our hands with the club, but at the same time it doesn't change any rotations of the club. In order for me not to create any additional counter rotations and stuff like that, because these things take a lot of time. And now, if you realize how effective it is, how helpful it is, you will understand how to use those scripts. And it actually makes sense why it is called BasicOverrig script, because essentially it's additional rigging system on top of the existing character rig or object rig, doesn't really matter. The main advantage of this system, of this additional overrig, is not in the scripts itself, although it's, of course, they are very helpful, but in the fact that you can combine those scripts, those different functionalities, and create rigs which allow me to adjust or even create any kind of animation. They allow me to achieve the maximum result in the shortest amount of time. That is why it's very convenient and very useful in production, especially in production environment. Let's go back to our simple example. Here I'd like to go back to all these three knots that we discussed previously, because there is one interesting function, interesting kind of nuance in these knots which I wanted to talk about, and now it's the time to talk about this nuance moments. Let's say I have this animation, and maybe I want to, let's say, move this animation. Right now the ball is dependent on the cube and spins inside it. I want to take my sphere animation and just move it down, just directly, vertically down. Of course I can apply a knot, and maybe I can either use translate Z channel, just can move it right like this, or I can use the animation layer and move it down like this. But let's say I want to do the following. How can I make this shift, this offset, I mean, to be more gradual? Of course, for that I can use the weight of an animation layer as an example. But I also want this object to continue to obey the controls. Take a look. All these three objects, all these three nodes, have the special attribute, a special channel, which is called attach. You can see it over here. What does it do? When we create this object, let me show you actually. I'm going to merge the animation layer just to make it a bit more simple. We have this attach attribute, and when we create our nodes in a simple manner, I mean in a manner which I've shown you previously, it doesn't work. I mean, it has a value of 1 and it doesn't do anything. Over here you can see there are two buttons right here. 0 and 1. Those are the way to control the weight of a specific channel. So let's say we take, maybe set it to 0. Over here is 1, and over here is going to be 0. It doesn't always work. Right away you may have some kind of twitches, you see, some kind of lags. You can see, you can take a look at the curve that was created. You see that this channel is, by default, it is locked, so it isn't affected by the animation layers. But once you created some keys, as we did previously, with the zeros and ones, once you did it, you can edit those keys in the graph editor. Yeah, maybe something like this. I think you can actually understand where this is going. When this attribute is turned off, so when the value is actually equal to 0, the animation works as previously, so it's kind of the old animation. Where we have the 1 value, our animation with not works. And again, with the 0 value, the animation is based around the parent object as it was previously before any of our changes. The coolest part is that you can add several nodes in such a way. So there could be a few such nodes. By the way, there is another feature. If we, let's say, before you assign a node, we can select a time range, then create a node, and with the selected time range, this node is going to be created in the selected time range, and it will be automatically limited with this attach attribute. So we have attach 0 out of the selected time range and attach 1 in the selected time range. So again, with the value 0, the animation is being played as usual, so it's controlled by the standard animation, by the standard control object, but with attach equal to 1, our locator, our node, is controlling the animation instead. Let's say if we have different objects with different attach attributes. Let's say if those attach attributes are overlapped in some shape or form, then the influence of these nodes is equal to the average between those two influences, between those two attach attributes. So the influence is split between two objects. And of course, if the weight is equal to 0, then the animation is played as usual, so it's controlled by the, control object. And of course, if we have some kind of this situation, to some extent the animation is going to be played based on a control object, so it's going to be a normal animation. And to some extent, the attach attributes going to affect the nodes, going to affect the animation as well. Right here we're using simple nodes, so not offset, not orient. We're using just a simple node, and you can use any number of these nodes. To be honest, I wouldn't advise doing so, because you'll get confused quite quickly. But 2-3 nodes, I think it's a maximum number. You can tell that this system actually resembles constraints, just regular constraints. And of course, this entire system is based around using constraints. But you can't achieve the same result just by using constraints. It's not easy to do everything just using constraint, because there is a different calculations that goes under this hood. So what else can we do? Let's say if we need our object to be controlled by several objects, maybe for whatever reason you need it, you can attach one node. Then in a different selected time range, you can maybe attach a different node. And you see that this object is going to listen these nodes at a different time ranges. And of course, you can do something with these objects. For example, in this case, maybe I can stretch them at the edges in 3 directions. Of course, you can animate those objects, you can animate these channels. And in order to make a smooth transition between those different nodes, because right now they're quite sharp, because there is a transition in only one frame, we can set it up like this. We can use, of course, our graph editor. We can change the curves. We can make it like this. We can make slight overlaps in order to create this smooth transition. Gonna make it like this, and you see, very small, very smooth transition. It is actually a very powerful tool with this attach channel. So I advise you to use this channel, this kind of nuance in working with these nodes. I strongly advise you to try to understand this feature and try to incorporate it in your work. Next one, which I'd like to discuss, and by the way, of course, we have the same attached channel in the node offset, in the node orient, but I actually don't advise to use several objects with those nodes. So I mean node orient and node offset. It's better to use only one object with this attach function. And in general, let's say you're creating such hierarchy, maybe in such a manner, in this time range. I mean, just twist it and maybe that's it. And again, I do not advise you to use several objects with these nodes because it's going to lead to errors and it will not work properly. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about other different functions. For now, I'm going to skip this next tab, which is called Smart Objects. We're going to get back to it a bit later. Let me explain the parent tab. So parent inside. Let's assume I have an animation like this. The ball is inside the cube. And of course, with these two objects, we have some kind of an animation. And we also have a separate animation with this purple cube, which is just, passing by, minding its own business. I'm going to select the sphere. I'm going to create a node. Then, holding Shift, I'm going to select the purple cube, and press the parent inside button. After that, the animation of this yellow ball is going to be rebaked or recalculated inside this purple cube. What can I do after that? I can effectively move and rotate this purple cube, and you'll see that the animation is going to be transferred accordingly. Well, I can just do anything I want, essentially. And it's going to be animated with the yellow sphere. The next button, which I'd like to talk about, is let's see, parent world. It's essentially the inverse operation of the previous one. If previously we are recalculating the animation inside the object of some kind, then this parent world button recalculates the animation from the object space to the world space. So kind of to the world coordinate system. Right now you can see that we have a locator which is inside this cube. You can see it over here. I'm gonna press the parent world button. Now we have this animation, these locators, and it is outside the hierarchy, so it is in a global space. And it is kind of independent of the cube. Let's move on. The next button is called swap. Actually, maybe it's a bit self-explanatory, but essentially it's a script that changes the hierarchy, the parenting hierarchy. It swaps it around. Let's say we have, again, our animation. We have a cube. It's a global space. And then we have a sphere, which is inside the second cube. And it is being rotated like this. And maybe, let's say I want take my two cubes and I want to rotate them around the sphere, maybe around this center point of the sphere, this pivot. But of course I can't do that in a simple, manner, so I should kind of change hierarchy, I should reparent those. I'm gonna apply a node to those two objects. Then I'm gonna parent one node inside the other one. So I'm gonna establish the hierarchy at first. And then the parent node I'm gonna parent to the second cube. Let's say that's what we want to achieve. Let me explain how it works. Right now we have this basic animation when the sphere is rotated around the cube, because the sphere is parented to the cube, to the blue cube I mean. But we want to rotate the object around the sphere. How do we do it? Notice the position. I mean in the hierarchy, where it is placed in the hierarchy. We have a node inside of another node, and this node is parented to the second cube. After that, I'm selecting the main node, then the target node, and pressing the node button. You see that the script recalculates the hierarchy, and it saves the animation inside this locator and swaps the locator's positions in the hierarchy. But it actually does it under the hood, and you see that in the outliner the hierarchy actually remains the same, so subordination of the hierarchy remains the same. And now we can use the animation layer, and we can animate the additional rotation around the sphere in such a way. Maybe like this. I'm gonna rotate it like this, and maybe we'll have something like this. Then I'm gonna merge the animation layer, then I'm gonna apply the swap function again, and again we recalculate the position, we can create another animation layer, and animate again the hierarchy based around the blue cube instead of a yellow or orange sphere. As a result, we have this animation, which actually works greatly. Now, the last part of this parent tab, parent across. It's a relatively new function. Let me explain how it works. We have this thing that we made. Let's bake it. You see, there are some very complex curves, complex turns, and stuff like that. Now I want to take this entire animation system that we have, so this sphere and this cube which are animated together, and I want to parent both of these objects to the second cube, to the purple one, in order to maybe animate it separately. As I've shown you previously, in order to do it, I can create a node, then hold down Shift button and select a cube, and then use the parent inside function. Or you can actually do it in a simpler and faster manner. Because essentially it's a very common operation when you're working with some kind of rigs where you can change the rig hierarchy. Of course, it's most of the rigs. And you should constantly work with different hierarchies, different attachments and such. So this operation is quite common. That's why this workflow using nodes is very effective. But you can speed it up even more. In order to save time, because it's very common operation, it's very often that you need to make such a control, then attach a node, then attach this node to another control, and instead of doing this two operations, three operations, you can do it in one. You can just use parent across, and this function effectively works in the same way as creating nodes and attaching nodes to each other and so on and so forth. But it saves time. And also there is a small bonus or advantage of this approach, of this function. Let's say if we use this button, we can select the time range. Then we can press parent across button. And then we're gonna bake the animation only in this selected time range. And of course we can limit the time range with this attach attribute as previously was stated. It means that the animation will be the same in one time range and it's going to be affected by the node in a specific time range. Again, it's the same workflow with attach attribute. Now, let me demonstrate how it works in a specific example. How to combine these different nodes, different types of nodes. Because, of course, by itself, nodes, without practice, you will not be able to understand how it works. Let's say right here I have this animation. There is a guy who is taking a knife and he puts his knife inside this table, so to speak. And let's say you have a situation where the beginning of the animation actually works fine before the moment he puts his knife in. You can actually do this animation manually. But right here, where he puts his knife inside the table, it's a bit more difficult animation to work with from the technical point of view. Of course, yeah, it's kind of very simple animation, you know how to do it. But to achieve, to work with this animation, with this moment, to avoid any sliding, to avoid any problems, it's a bit more difficult. Question is, how can we optimize our workflow, how can we speed it up in order to avoid parenting problems, hierarchical problems, and such. Of course, right here we need to switch to some kind of global coordinates, world space, maybe in a hand or a knife. Of course, if I switch it to the world space, what should we do with the knife itself? Of course, I should do it inside the existing curves, and I have a lot of curves over here. And even if you switch the hand to the world coordinates, you need to make the knife stuck inside the table without any sliding. And if the knife is supposed to be moving in some way, it should be rotated and moved around this pivot point. And this pivot point is supposed to be attached to the cube, because I want to move the cube as well to animate the impact of this knife. As an animation, it's quite simple animation, but from a technical point of view, it has some technical issues, some technical moments that you need to address. And those technical difficulties are the exact things that should be and can be solved with my BasicOverrig script. Let's move on and let's take a look at how can we actually do it. The first thing, since the knife is inside the hand, it's not in global space, and so it's not in the world. From the point of view of the hierarchy, we can see that the knife has its own animation. Of course, we should try to keep this animation. Let's try using nodes, and let's actually try to connect our arm and parent our arm to the knife. I'm creating a node. Now I have a node inside the knife control, knife object rather. Then I can select the hand control, then clicking the node again. And then I'm going to parent it inside the locator, which controls the knife, using the, again, parent inside function. Let's do it. Okay, great. What's the result? You can see that the animation itself is preserved. It's completely preserved, actually. But we have changed the hierarchy of parenting inside this animation, inside this rig. You see that the hand now is following the knife movement. You see that I can move the knife and the hand is following. That's great, but it's not enough. The next thing we can do. How can we approach the knife? Maybe it should be stuck inside the table, and over here it should be kind of fixed, should be stuck inside this position. I'm gonna select the control object for my knife, I mean the locator, of course, applying the node offset, and I'm offsetting this node in the position of the pivot. Shouldn't be ideal, but more or less we can rotate it as well. So I'm gonna repeat, I'm placing this locator in the position of a pivot where it is supposed to be. Then I'm deselecting the locator, or I can press the deselect button in case if it's quite difficult for you to deselect anything. And you'll see that the animation remains the same, with all the mistakes, of course, with all the issues, but it doesn't matter for now. But now the animation is baked inside this locator. And in order to fix some problems at least, all that we can do is to select the locator and then just delete unnecessary keys after it is being stuck inside the table. Like this. Let's take a look. You see it is stuck. It doesn't move anymore. I mean, the knife is stuck, of course. It doesn't move with anything. And also, of course, in this moment we can refine the movement. Maybe we can refine the movement of the torso to make it a bit more beautiful. Again, we can use animation layers for that. I actually prefer using layers in general when I'm animating. I think it's very powerful workflow, powerful pipeline. Maybe I can add some offsets, I can emphasize the torso movement, things like that. I think it would be great, would be looking great. To avoid stretching in the arm, overextension. And of course, we can take a knife, we can create another animation layer, and we can animate this knife using this pivot, because of course it should be moving in some manner. Maybe it should be like this. Maybe a bit too much. Let's move it like this. And then I'm gonna use zero value in this animation layer and get it back to the previous position. Yep. Yeah, why not? Yeah, looks great. Looks cool. I'm not working with the torso for now, because yeah, there are some problems. Let's just maybe fix it slightly using the animation layer. Yeah, maybe something like this. Okay. Let's say I like this point of impact of the knife inside the table. Now I want to add some kind of extra movement. Like, let's say I want to move this table when the knife is being stuck inside it. So I kind of want it to react to this knife movement, to this knife stabbing the table, so to speak. In order to animate this table and make it react with the knife, and of course if I start animating as is, I will be forced to reanimate the knife, and there will be some issues. Well, not issues, but you will be able to do it, but it just will be a bit more difficult. What shall we do? First of all, when you want to make some kind of operations with geometry or any other objects, the first thing you should do is attach those objects to nodes, because there might be scales, wrong scales, some additional scales, some, I know, construction history and such. You just apply a node and you will make no mistakes such way. Now, we have a locator that controls a knife, you can see. Then we have a locator that controls the table. We can parent one inside the other. As a result, we have an entire animation, and it is recalculated in the new locator, which is the table locator. Again, I'm emphasizing that essentially we're creating an additional rig system. That's why it's called OverRig. So we're creating another rig over the main rig, which you're using for the character. It doesn't matter. So it's not just kind of additional locators or stuff like that. Those are just, this is just essentially a new rig on top of the main rig. And now let's take a look. On the one hand, I can start animating the cube. Again, I can create a separate animation layer for that. Maybe at the point of, in the moment of hitting the table itself should be rotated. It should be maybe shaken a little bit. I will not try creating a super polished animation. I'll just want to get the point across. Boom. Alright. But maybe with this new animation, I don't like the fact that the knife is stuck inside the table and it moves simultaneously with the table. I mean, maybe it's logical, but it's not artistically pleasing. I want to create some additional rotations for the knife. Remember, we actually did the same thing with the club and the hands when we were animating the troll or something like that. I'm gonna disable the animation layer for now. By the way, that's another advantage of using animation layers, because you can switch it off, you can change the weight of this animation layer, you can increase the influence of this layer in order to make it a bit more expressive. But I should mention that you can't increase the animation layer weight past 1, because it's additional functionality of my other scripts, and of course it can be bought as well. Okay, so let's leave it at 1 for now. Let's disable this animation layer. Then I'm gonna select this locator and apply the node Orient. And then I'm gonna reactivate this animation layer and see what happens. You see, I'm rotating this animation, this table, sorry, and the knife, but the knife keeps its orientation. And maybe I like how the cube is moving, the table is moving, and also can add some kind of new animations for the knife. Yeah, this guy over here. Let's make it bigger. I can add some additional motions, some separate rotations. Maybe it's kind of reaction of the knife when the table is being moved, being rotated. It just gives you some artistic possibilities, some artistic, ways of adding new animations without the necessity to reanimate anything, without the necessity to redo your animations and things like that. Again, I'm using animation layers constantly, and that's one of the main parts of my animation approach. Personally, I think that animation layers are great, and when people tell you that animation layers are not great in some way or form, don't listen to them. I think animation layers are great, especially with this approach, with this BasicOverrig script. So let's say I'm going to animate it like this. Maybe we should add an offset to the knife, add some kind of additional waving animation. Yeah, maybe something like this. Let's maybe move it by a few frames. Yeah, let's move it actually back by a few frames. Yeah, no, it shouldn't be like this. Let's take a look, let's think about it. Yeah, no, it should be moving like this. I think over here it should be moved over here. Yeah, like this. And you see that the hand begins to change. Maybe we can add some kind of additional motion to the hand, shoulder, elbow, because the energy, the impulse itself is of course going from the knife, and the impulse is going up the hierarchy of the arm. Yeah, I think that's the way it is. So let's assume that we're satisfied with the result. Let's say, yeah, I like what I get here. Maybe I want the cube to stand on the corner on its own. Let me merge the animation layers for now. But yeah, I want to make the cube stand on one corner over here. Okay, I can do it quite easily. I can create a node offset. I'm gonna place the locator in this corner to use it as a pivot. And then I can use another animation layer. I'm gonna select the time range before it's supposed to be standing on the corner. Then I'm gonna use the T button in order to fix all kind of stabilize only translate channels. So all is essentially all channels, translate is translate, and so on and so forth. And after that, I'm gonna set the value to 0, and it should work. Yeah, should work fine. Of course, let's do the same with the other corner. I'm gonna merge all the animation layers. Then I'm gonna create another node offset locator, and do the same for the another corner. I'm gonna select the time range, the suitable time range, and then it should be 0 over here. I'm gonna select the time range, translate, alright. Again, setting the same keys in translate channels. Bam bam. And accordingly, you can naturally animate it in any way possible. You can use other corners. You can add any other additional animations. It's again, it's about the artistic choice without any technical issues or technical limitations, rather. I'm gonna set it to linear, I guess. I think it should end faster. Yeah. Well, that's about it. In general, it's not a very complicated process. It's not a very complicated pipeline. Essentially, we've used some technical aspects. We've created this animation technically using some technical approaches, scripts, without the necessity to create specific, very specialized rigs, because that would be quite difficult and maybe not necessary. Let's actually move on to smart objects. That's a separate tab which is located in the script. And these smart objects were created based on the request of the classical animators. For some animators, it was very difficult to work with nodes because those animators were actually forced to create too many frames, and it was very, for them, it was kind of tedious. I can understand it's not for everyone. Essentially, those smart objects are the same as not offset, not orient. So when I create a smart object, again, it creates a node, but this node has keys which are the same keys as in the original animation. It is done in such a way in order to simplify the process of creating kind of traditional animations in a traditional manner, so to speak. It allows you to avoid rebaking some keys, baking them frame by frame, in order to work with the pose-to-pose approach, with the straight-ahead approach, and so on and so forth. You can see that let's say, we have keys over here, in another object we have keys over here. So essentially we're creating nodes, and these nodes have the same keys as the original animation. The same is with node Orient. Again, the same keys, same positions, same values. I think the most intriguing part of this system, of this smart object system, is how actually do we work with the parent objects, parent and side functions and such. Let's say if we use the smart parent and side, again, it does the same. It rebakes one object inside the other one, so it effectively does the same thing as a parent and side, classic parent and side. But the resulting number of keys after this rebaking will be equal to the sum of these keys and these keys. And accordingly, if we, let's say, remove everything from here, this object is inside of this object. And of course, if I want to make it world, make it global, smart world, the number of keys will be equal to the sum of keys of these two objects. Also, another point of interest, or points rather of interest, are two types of baking. You can see those buttons over here. There is a smart bake OBJ, and there is a smart bake not. What is the difference? The logic is the following. If, let's say, I press the smart bake OBJ, the script will take a look at the objects keys, and I mean objects, so not locators, objects keys, and it's going to bake the animation and keep these keys in the same position, same values as they were on this object. If I press the smart bake not function button, Then the script is going to bake keys based on the keys inside the locator. And what's the difference? Let's say I animated the locator, I wanted to create some kind of additional motions based around specific pivots. Maybe I wanted to create additional details in animation at some point. Maybe I've animated actually every frame in a specific time range. It doesn't matter. If I use the Smart Bake OBJ option, it's going to bake the keys, only those keys that were present on the object before this entire process, and all the keys that were created on the locator actually would be lost. But if I use not baking with not, then it's going to bake all the keys that are present on the locator. And that's effectively the difference. Personally, I very rarely use these functions, I mean these smart baking, smart nots and such, because to be honest, I don't need it. I'm very comfortable working with just simple nots like not orient, not offset. But classical animators, traditional animators who work with this system, they say that this is far more convenient to work with rather than comparing to simple system. It is especially convenient when you're doing sketches, rough blockouts, some iterations. Alright, let's move on. The next button I'd like to talk about is called the Aim button. And what does it do? Let's say we have some kind of animation. Let's take a look at it. I'm going to select an object, press the Aim button. Two locators are going to appear instead of one as it was previously. I'm going to move one of these locators like this. So I'm moving it in the direction where it's supposed to be. After that, I can select the first locator, or second locator rather, or you can use the right arrow key. It's a standard hotkey for moving along the hierarchy. And then I'm moving the second locator to the side. So the first locator is supposed to be kind of up locator, up vector, and the second locator is kind of side vector, side locator. And then I'm either clicking in an empty space or clicking the deselect button. Let's take a look at what happens. You see the rotations of these objects are recalculated into these two locators. Top locator is aimed at a certain direction. You see how it works. So it's essentially the object itself is aimed at this locator, this top locator, and the second locator controls the rotation or twist, the twist attribute for this object. As you can see, it's a tool which is very useful to work with weapons like swords and stuff like that. But of course, it can be used not only for that. After that, you can, for example, let's say you can take these curves, those keys. Let's say I have this arc. For now, I want to kind of tweak it, so I'm just deleting the necessary keys. And now it's better for my purposes. Now I can do the same for the side locator. So, in other words, any rotation is replaced with those two locators and can be edited with those two locators. Why do we need this? Of course, you can see it can be used for working with weapons in order to get some smooth arcs, better lines of action. But you can also use this tool with offsetting frames, so offsetting keys, which allows us to animate clothing, some kind of, tails and stuff like that. Essentially, this button, this function, is very helpful in order to edit and fix some mistakes in rotations, some wrong rotations, and things like that. Let's say you see that the object is rotating in a wrong way, in a wrong manner. Of course, you can take a regular curve and can try fixing that, but you may encounter gimbal locks. It may look horrible, it may look kind of not really good. That is why you can use those locators and get essentially better control. Let me show you another example, just, to be more precise. Let's say we have this guy. Remember, over here, this guy, this troll, is grabbing his club and hitting the ground. Oh, he does something, doesn't matter actually. But let's say the trajectory of the club is not ideal for me, I want to fix it up. By the way, over here I want to show you how to work with attach function as well. I think it's a good situation, good case for that. Let's say I want to edit the trajectory of this club. To make it more, more smoothly, to create a more pleasant arc of action. If you remember, previously we've made certain corrections in the arm animation in order for the arm and the club to move simultaneously. Let's say if I start to edit the club at this point, then I will be forced to change the arms animation as well. It will be changed. It will be forced to change. So at this point, this parent locator shouldn't be working. This node shouldn't be working. That is why I have to set attach to 0 at some point, attach attribute. If you remember, the attach attribute controls essentially the influence of this node, of my nodes that we create at certain points, at certain time ranges. Right here it should be 0. You see over here it doesn't work, and over here it works. And now at a certain time range I can fix the club motion if it needs be, and at the other time range I'll still have my node which affects the club and the hand at the same time for the simultaneous motion. Alright, let's go back to the club. At this point in this animation I do not animate the club directly, so I animate just the wrist. So essentially I can apply the aim button, aim function to the wrist. Then I'm gonna set necessary locators. The first one's going to be over here, the top locator. Maybe placed a bit farther from the club, but it doesn't matter. Then the second locator I'm gonna place right over here. Good practice is to place it kind of perpendicular to the object which you are supposed to be rotating. If we had an X, maybe it would be a bit more clear, but I think I got the point across. And then I'm pressing the deselect button. The animation was recalculated, and now I can continue. Let's say I can frame by frame approach this animation and fix it in a necessary manner, add some things up, smooth it out, add necessary arcs, create a smoother motion, smoother movement. Of course, you can also use any tools that you have available, apart from the BasicOverrig script, like tools for interpolation, for different twin tools. I'm not going to talk about these tools in detail because there are a lot of such tools, so it doesn't really matter right now. Alright, so he's swinging like this. Somewhere around here I want to maybe fix it. You see this animation kind of a bit too sharp at times. I see I have some problems in the X channel. Yeah, I can delete those keys. It's gonna be a bit smoother. Alright. Yeah, it's clear vertical motion. It's a very handy tool at its core. But question is, what else can we do? What else could it be used for? For example, where we still can fix our animation. Let's say, for example, I do not like this motion. Maybe I don't like the body movement he has. It seems like it's not natural. It doesn't look very natural. He's acting a bit strange, let's say. But what can be done in this situation? Well, you can either directly stretch it straight from the chest. Stretch the aim locator from the chest. But depending on what kind of rig you have, the chest, adding the locator to the chest may create some complicated relationships. If you have maybe some specific hierarchy in your chest rig, and because of that, the math under the hood of this aim function, aim locator, may not work properly. In order to avoid any problems, I'm gonna apply a knot first, and whether you have some channels locked or not, it doesn't actually matter, it will work fine. And then I can apply the aim function to the knot itself. Let's say I don't like this lateral movement, I'm gonna move it sideways like this. And say side locator is going to be like this. And it's done. Now we can control the rotation of his body like this. It either can be twisting or he's kind of leaning back and forth or left to right, left and right. And of course this operation happens relative to the chest control, so like this, it will work fine. And accordingly, after that, we can turn on our trail function and see what problems we have. We can see that this trail, this arc in motion, is a bit unclear, so we can delete unnecessary keys just to make it a bit more smooth. Just as a test, we can do it. Yeah, you see it looks better now, it works smoother. Before that, we had an issue over here. The motion was a bit laggy, so to speak. But after deleting unnecessary keys, it became better, got better. And that's one of the examples of using this aim function, aim button. Okay, very nice. Let's say that's what I want, and I've just edited the necessary keys. Of course, then we can bake this animation, bake the chest control, and then just delete unnecessary locators, all this construction stuff that we used for our manipulations. The next section I'd like to talk about, right here I'm not going to focus on each button too much because it's rather easy, to be honest. I think I'm going to show you the most important, most useful buttons, most useful functions I have over here. Because some buttons, I'm going to mark them really quickly, like these buttons, buttons, they are very useful for creating looped animations, like idles, walks, runs, stuff like that. And I have a separate series for these buttons, for these functions. It's very useful, and it's actually very unique information. It's not taught in animation schools, how to animate cycles very easy, quickly, and essentially procedurally in some manner. Alright, right here I'm going to talk about some basic functions. And also I have these keys over here. Those are essentially used as alternative to set key function, but with a twist, so to speak. If I have selected time range, I have separate buttons, and if I, let's say, press first button, it's gonna set keys on all channels for this time range, and the rest of the buttons are just for separate channels, so like only translations for a selected time range, only rotations, and so on and so forth. And the last button creates a key in a selected time range for selected channels in the channel box, selected attributes. It's very useful while working with animation layers or using this animation layers pipeline. I have already shown you part of this workflow. I think I'm gonna touch it a bit later, but yeah, it's indispensable magic operation. And those buttons are quite useful while working with the mockup data, like cleaning up mockup animations. You know, huge chunks of animations of keys where you have like 3000 frames or even 1000 frames, and it's very difficult to navigate through those. Maybe, let's say, if I had 500 frames, And you see that, let's say, if you want to focus on a specific time range for this 500 frames, it's very difficult to kind of pinpoint what frames do you need, what frames you're working with right now, and how do these buttons help in this case. Essentially, you can select a few keys, and by pressing this button, you can select the entire time range and focus on this time range inside the graph editor. I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to select it and press the button. So it focuses in the graph editor, focuses on the selected time range, which is extremely useful for working with mockup data and makes the job a lot easier. The next function is called delete. Well, it's kind of self-explanatory, but essentially you may select some time range. It either can be on the timeline, or you can select it a few time ranges in the graph editor, and by clicking this delete button, it simply deletes those keys in a certain, again, time range. The thing over here, the next button, essentially focuses your timeline. So if you select, again, certain time range, certain keys, and then you press this button, it's going to focus your time range, your time slider, into this time range. And also, let's say if you set time slider to a specific frame, the next time you decided to kind of zoom in this time range, you will effectively zoom in your time range around this time slider, around the position of this time slider, of the frame on which this time slider is located, like this. So I can just shift between different parts of my timeline. If I have, again, a lot of frames, we can highlight everything on this position. It's very convenient while working with mockup data when the volume of frames, with the amount of frames, is huge. And the last one, the last button, last function, it moves the time slider, and it moves it to the middle of selected time range. And again, it's kind of useful while working with mockup data. We're not going to work with mockup data in this lesson, but yeah, you can trust me with that. And there is another thing. Let me Control Z that all that operations. I'm gonna get back to a certain point. Should be around here. Yeah, let's say like this. We want to be over here. So these buttons, those ones, allow us to shift the current frames by one. It's either left or right, or you can also shift it not by one, but 1/10 of a frame. The next buttons actually move frames subsequently. Let me explain how does it work. Those tools are exceptionally very helpful while animating fabric, tails, other stuff which is supposed to be having some kind of offsets in its motion. Let's say I have this animation. I'm going to apply knots to these objects. Then I'm selecting each knot one by one, and just shifting the animation by one frame, and as a result I have something like this. Of course, you can make it not as drastic. Yes, something like this. Maybe those are the joints for the fabric, or some kind of, dangling something, I don't know. I can also show you a real example, real animation. Here I have the character to which I'm applying the mockup data, mockup animation. It's not cleaned up yet, it's a work in progress. And you see he is picking up the cup, and this character has this piece of clothing. Let's animate it. Essentially just a chain of joints, nothing special. I'm going to select these joints. So essentially 3 joints for this clothing. Then I'm going to apply the aim button. I see I have a few these aim systems. I'm going to move it like this. Then I'm selecting second locators and move it to the side. Clicking on empty space or pressing the deselect button. Baking it. We see we have this situation. Now I have my locators that control the motion, the movement. And now I can offset this motion for these locators. And I'm using this subsequent offset because you see it offsets everything, again, subsequently, so not by the equal amount of frames, but again, subsequently. And you see now it works like a piece of fabric, like it is supposed to be. This script is rather useful for game animations, again, when you are animating something with joints. That's a very exact approach. And there are other scripts which may help you to achieve the similar or the same result, but there are some disadvantages in those scripts. The main idea is that this approach, my approach, allows you to control this process iteratively. It allows you to control it at every stage of your animation, because you can select your locators if needs be, you can bake it to a separate layer, you can control the degree of this animation layer, essentially the weight of this animation layer. Actually, I can do it right now. I can actually increase this offset. Yeah, I think it's a bit too much, but you see the point, hopefully. So this method is very useful for anything that has complex multi-joint structure, like clothing, tails, things like that. Let's move on. The next function that I have is the selector. I think I already told you about the selector. Essentially, it memorizes the last operation. It's like source remembers the last object that the node was applied to. The button 1 remembers the operation if the result of this operation is equal to one object, like simple node, for example. And the button 2 remembers operations with the two objects which result into objects, like for example aim function, which gives you top locator and the side locator, so those are like two objects. Selector constraint, it's when you are selecting a locator, you're clicking this button, and then the object which is the source of this locator, this node, is going to be selected as well. The next thing, the next function that we have, I mean, from all these functions and scripts, is double nodes, local and global. Let me explain how it works. Right here, for example, I have a flying sword. Doesn't matter what it is, it's some kind of rotating object, which is maybe moving through space or rotating, doesn't matter. Just something is flying. So how can I make the animation where this object is not only moving in space, along some kind of trajectory, but also rotates around its own axis, maybe along a very specific axis, like this axis, for example. You see in rotations, in the graph editor, in rotation channels, there is nothing that I can use for getting a rotation along this specific angle, this specific axis. So I can just move one channel and rotate it in a specific manner. Also, I won't be probably able to do it through layers, because for the same reason, actually, I don't have specific layers, channels, axis for very specific angle that I want to achieve. Maybe if I rotate it like this through the animation layer, let's take a look at what we get. Well, yeah, most likely, yeah, I will have not very good thing. Instead of that, I can select this object, press the double node, local type. After that, you'll see that there is a system that appeared for this function. We have a group, and inside there is a locator. This locator will most likely have 0 rotations, or maybe 360 rotations, which is effectively the same. It depends on some external forces, that doesn't really matter. And this animation was transferred to this group And now inside this group there is also a locator which has its own rotations and which you can use for your additional rotations. Because our original object is attached or constrained to this locator. How is it helpful? It's a very simple procedure. I'm gonna switch to gimbal mode. And you see what we have. This axis for this locator, for this new locator, are being rotated with the animation for this sword. So we kind of save the orientation for this object during entire animation. And now we can just take our locator, animate it in necessary manner, maybe something like this. Maybe 720 degrees would be fine, like 2 turns. And you see it rotates, and it is also being rotated around its own axis. Why is it helpful? Well, of course, it's very helpful for some kind of juggling objects, when you maybe have a character which juggles some objects. Of course, because there are some rotations in the objects around its own axis when it's in the air and stuff like that. I'd say that this function, this double node function, is mainly used for polishing your animations, adding kind of last small movements, small animations to make it a bit more fancier. Like maybe if you have an arm moving and you want to make some kind of maybe twisting motion or something like that, or you maybe want to make the chest of your character to appear even bigger, or turn it in a certain direction, or twist it in a very certain manner during the kick or during the fighting animation. As an illustration, let me show you something. Again, it's our orc, our troll that we've used for a lot of examples at this point. Let's say I want to... Maybe over here his chest animation is too small. I mean, I want to emphasize it, I want to increase it. I want for him to rotate his chest a bit more broadly, a bit more expressive. Of course, I could use animation layers for that, but it is much easier to use and work with double nodes. I'm going to apply the double node local mode. Again, I'm going to create the animation layer, set a key, because again, my approach is focused around using animation layers. I just prefer working in such a way. If you take a look at it, essentially we have one channel which is controlling the rotation. In this case, it's just we're just adding rotations along the axis, certain axis of our character, and that's about it. I'm gonna rotate it like this, and somewhere around here I want him to, I want him to be rotated like this. And the moment of impact, it's rotated like this. Of course, it's I think it's a bit over exaggerated at this point, but you see the idea, I think. Let's take a look. You see he rotates his chest. It looks silly, but nevertheless. I'm gonna try shifting the keys slightly just to get necessary feeling. But overall, I think the idea is clear. That's one of the examples. Or, for example, I want to do something else. Maybe I want him to do something with the wrist. Maybe I want to rotate the wrist in a very specific manner. Again, I can apply double node for that. Gonna set keys, again in a separate animation layer. I can rotate it like this. Maybe at the same time, when he is picking up his club. It's rotated like this, then I rotate his wrist like this when he's grabbing his club with his free hand. And so on and so forth. In general, it's a very handy tool for polishing your animations, adding some small tweaks. Now, what about the double knot, but in the world mode, world space? They, local and world, they work in very similar manner, but they have some differences. Well, maybe a very slight difference in the operation, so to speak. Essentially, the world type of this double knot is the opposite of local double knot. Let's say I have an object and it's being rotated, and now I want to rotate this object in the global axis. But of course I can't rotate it in the world axis, because if we take a look at our curves that we have, with our animation curves, I mean, let's open up the graph editor. Let's see. You see, we have some kind of very complex combination of these curves, of these rotation curves. And if we take a look at the gimbal mode, you see that those axes are rotated in a very specific manner. We can't just take one specific axis, one single axis, and rotate our object in this way. So we select our object, apply the world double knot. You see that we have a locator created in this setup. It's the parent locator, and we also have the second locator inside this locator, which has been created. So one locator inside the other. If we take a look at the external object, external locator, we have our animations transferred to this upper locator, this parent locator, and our original object is attached to the inner locator, so child locator. Our parent locator has 0 rotations, and as a result we can use it in order to get and give additional rotations to the object, the sort in this case. It's rather easy, so let's actually do it. So I can just animate it like this, maybe. I believe it was like 720 degrees, so just 360. Yeah, maybe something like this. Also, I forgot I haven't created the animation layer, and it is better to use an animation layer in this setup. It's a bit more controllable this way. You see now it's being twisted, it flies through the space, so works as we wanted it to. This double knot, world double knot, can be applied in different types of animations. Let me give you an example. Let's say over here I have an initial animation. There is a character that throws the disc. The animation itself is rather boring, maybe. It's kind of standard animation. You see, the character is just rotating. I think I want to make this animation a bit richer, so maybe I can add some additional rotations along specific axes. Let's say I can select the chest controller, apply the world double knot, and then using an animation layer, I can add in some additional rotations, maybe like this. Somewhere around here it should be maybe, I can rotate the character like this, to exaggerate some poses, to add some accents. Right here he's going up, then down. somewhere around here. Maybe I want him to be rotated such a way, in such a way. And when he throws this object, I think he should be rotated like this. It's a very quick way to add some changes into your poses, essentially. Let me fix some things up. Bam. Yep. Let's move it like this. Yeah, somewhere around here we're gonna set our animation layer to 0 to get back to our original animation. It's a very simple operation, effectively. If you decided to do it maybe just through curves, just by fixing animation, it would actually be quite difficult to do because there are a lot of complex rotations, complex intertwined rotations. Everything is being rotated, the entire rig is being moved in space, so it's quite difficult to achieve. But right here, I've done it in minutes and achieved a much richer result for my animation. Let's actually tweak maybe a hand like this. All right. I think right here it should be rotated. He should be rotated like this. Yeah, maybe something like this. That's it. That's how it was before. And that's with our new changes, with our animation layer. You see, it's a bit more dynamic, it has much richer poses, so there are some issues, but I can fix them later. Great. Very fast, very effective. Let's move on. Snapshot. There are 3 buttons over here in this section. What does it do? I'm going to select the object. Then I'm going to press the Snapshot Object button. As a result, we're going to get the locator. And this locator is moved in the same way, animated in the same way as the object. How can we use it? You see, we have actually a huge number of applications for this system. And to be honest, I find new uses for it every day, every time I animate something. For example, let's say the easiest, I think, way how you can use it is to memorize and remember how the object was initially moving. Maybe with the object when it had some kind of animation. Maybe you don't want to lose this movement, but you want to try other options, other variants. So you're just selecting an object, snapshotting this object. Then you can save this locator in a separate layer, and it can just be left in this layer, and you'll continue working, and you can get back to this locator with the animation, with the motion that you needed, that you created previously. You can constrain your object to this locator if needs be, bake your animation, and that's it. Another application for this system, I think it's a bit more interesting. Here, for example, how can I use this system? Right now I have an animation where I have my cube, I have my sphere, and essentially my sphere is moving after my cube. And the sphere itself has its own rotations, its own movement, and so on and so forth. But how can I make an animation where, let's say, I have a wheel, maybe bus wheel or car wheel, doesn't matter, and it rolls maybe along some kind of surface. Maybe it rolls down the track or something like that. How can I achieve it without failing this entire system, entire, let's say, existing animation? essentially, how can I make it so that the sphere isn't going through the geometry, through the surface? So in some way, I need to correct the movement. And of course, I maybe should do it frame by frame, because yeah, there are a lot of corrections that I need to do. In this case, I have, well, 100 frames as an example, and I'd say that's a lot of work for 100 frames if you do it directly. But what can we do in order to optimize this workflow? For example, we're going to select this object. We're going to create a locator inside this sphere. I'm going to place it at the point of contact of this object with the surface. Now I can take this locator. I'm going to create a snapshot. After that, I'm going to create, I'm going to select the cube, then I'm going to select the locator, then I'm going to use parent across function. And the only thing we need right now is to select this locator, this snapshot that we've created. Let's do it through the animation layer actually. And select the translate Z channel and set the same value for this channel. Let's take a look. Yep, something like this. It may seem that that it's very actually maybe stupid task, that it will not be useful in any way, but to be honest, this type of operations for animations is used constantly in different types of animations, in people's animations, human animations, animals when they're walking, running, standing. I wouldn't say it's like constantly required for such operations, but nevertheless. The next curious thing is the snapshot component. What is it? This is the script that effectively removes the animation from either component, from either from the polygon, or from edges, or from vertices. It means that if we have an animation for our object, if we want to remove this animation or disable this animation for a specific component, I can do it using this function. It doesn't matter which component you use, but there is a difference in that if you remove the animation from the vertices or the edges, only translations are going to be removed. If you're removing animation from the polygon, then both rotations and translations are removed in this case. Question is, how can we use it? How is it helpful? What can be used for? Right here we have an animation. Let's say maybe yeah, you have a bouncing ball, it's being squashed, it is stretched, very regular, I would say, example in animation. And I had only one control available for squashing, for stretching. I couldn't control how it goes through the ground or it doesn't go through the ground. And you see, as a result, I have some vertices, some components that are going through the ground. So in general, the motion itself is fine for me, but because of this motion, some polygons are going through the ground, through the surface. So, but I need this object to be very firmly and precisely placed on the surface without this penetration. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to select a few vertices, because I think I don't need rotations in this case, so I can select just vertices. Then I can apply the function. It's going to create the locator. And after that, the animation from these vertices will be transferred to this locator, as usual. You can see what happens now. And it is just a locator, so it doesn't have anything else, anything attached to this locator. It is just an object with animation, without any constraints, without any geometry attached or constrained to this object, because there would be a lot of a huge amount of technical problems if that was the case. And now you can use this locator as an anchor point. Let's say you can select your object, our sphere in this case. I'm going to apply the knot, parent and side. And then, using the exact same principle that I've shown you, from this point in this time range, I'm gonna set the same values for the translate Z channel. Let's take a look at what we've got from this. Let's actually also use an animation layer to kind of tweak the position of the ball, because right here it's still going through the ground, and right here we can actually fix it. I can just lift it up slightly. Let's take a look. And yeah, it works. Great. And additionally, of course, we can also we can rotate this object using the animation layer. Again, we can add just additional stuff. Actually, while we're here, let's do the same with other translate channels. I mean, set the same. Let's set the same value, because there are some sliding problems, some general, common animation problems we can fix right now. And let's rotate the object as well in a separate animation layer. You can see that I'm creating a lot of animation layers because it's a bit more non-destructive this way. Is this, let's say I have a different problem. Let's say I have a cube. Let me place it over here. I want this cube to be glued or kind of attached to this, maybe to this polygon. I'm gonna highlight this polygon. Then I'm going to use the Snapshot Component function. You see I have a locator. It has rotations and translations. And now I can take my cube and parent my cube to this locator. Just using the simple parent function, the P button. Let's move it like this. Let's take a look. Yep. Yeah, that's what we get. Very nice. Also, you can use, of course, you can use this cube not to animate it separately. You can add some additional motions if it is needed. Very nice, very nice. I can scale it if needed, maybe at some points of my animation, and so on and so forth. That's just a kind of quick look for these functions. To summarize, it is used to attach something to the surface. And it is also can be used in game animations. It's actually very commonly and often used in the game animation. Maybe you have some kind of decorations on your cape or something else, or you have some object which are attached to the cape. Maybe like, bags or some maybe swords. You have an animated cape and you have these things that should be kind of animated with this cape. Of course, you are attaching those locators to specific polygons or vertices, getting this information, and then attaching, or parenting rather, this your objects to these objects in order to make those objects to move along this cape. It's very fast. It's very easy to use, because alternatively you will be forced to spend a lot of hours in order to animate necessary things. The third type of snapshot is particle snapshot. It's it's hardly useful for an animator, except if the animator works with effects, particle systems and stuff like that. But what is it? What can be used for? Let's say you have some kind of source, particle system. You have particles that are falling down, maybe bouncing around, doesn't matter. It's not the point. And at some points, you need to use those particle systems in order to get information from them. Let's say you need to get maybe a motion of these particle systems. You need to get collision information. Or maybe I want to use the particles animation, the particles movement, but apply it to a different object. Maybe I want my character to be attached to the specific particle and fly with this particle. How can we do it? We're selecting the particles, particles that we need. It's a bit difficult to see right now because they're very small. And then pressing this snapshot particle. As a result, let's take a look. I have these locators on the selected particles. So on the particles that I've selected. At the same time, what is interesting, these locators are also rotated with the movement of these particles. At the same time, these particles are also affected by speed. The scale of these locators are also dependent on the particles. So the faster particles are, the longer the locators. Potentially it can be used, maybe if we use spheres. I'm going to delete the particle system because it's not needed anymore. Let's add in, let's use a small sphere. Going to zero out rotations and scale. Scale is going to be set to 0.1. And let's see. At the beginning of the particle simulation, there might be some problems because it's the moment when particles are generated, so there's some, discrepancies. But that is not interesting for us. Specifically, we need only situation when particle is already flying. You see particle is moving and our sphere is being scaled. You see what happens. Kind of reminds of maybe a drop of water or stuff like that. So people can use it, people who works with special effects, because sometimes there are tasks when you have to get information from maybe particles and attach some objects to these particles and scale them accordingly. And then effectively you are getting locators, and as a result you can attach anything to these locators or use these locators for anything that you need. The only restriction I'd say that is not to select too many particles at the same time, because it may be too difficult to calculate. It will take a lot of time, because when you have a lot of particles, like maybe 100 particles, it's like too many particles. The next tab I'd like to talk about is the hierarchy, forward and reverse. What is it? Let's say I have an example, and right here I have 3 independent objects. I can select them one by one. And then again, use hierarchy. You see the animation is the same, but now each of these objects is represented by the joint, and those joints are connected in a hierarchy. And of course you can work with joints as with any joints. You can skin them, you can use them for any purposes. And the orientation of this axis is also correct, so those joints are oriented along each other in order to aim for the next object in the hierarchy. What does it give us? It gives me an opportunity to, for example, apply the aim function, which we used before. which we've taken a look before. And of course I can control the rotation, can control the direction. I can kind of direct the movement itself. Yeah, I can set the direction, set kind of the target for this joint chain. And what is the reverse? Well, at the first glance, it's the same thing. Yeah, you can see. So essentially it's just a joint chain with the same axis orientation and rotations and stuff like that. But there is a great difference. Right here I'm rotating this joint. You see that the joint chain itself is rotated, but the first object, which is supposed to be kind of attached to the first joint, isn't being rotated. So it works like as if we applied the not offset to the system, as if each next object is created with the offset relative to the previous one. It is especially important if you wanted to create a reverse animation in cases like if you have a joint chain and there is a geometry which is directly attached to this geometry, to this joint chain. Well, you have to kind of try it out and then you understand how it is used. Let's actually go to the next example, to the real animation, because it may be a bit difficult to understand. I think it will be a bit more clear if we take a look at the real animation. As an example, that is what is the reverse hierarchy can be used for. You can effectively use it for, getting such animations, such kind of animations, when the motion can be represented in a separate joint chain. So, to get this swimming animations, this flowing animation, or maybe he's hanging from some kind of ledge, or maybe there is an object with a tail and this tail is not moving by itself, it's being controlled only by the pelvis motions. Again, I think it's a bit more convenient to think of it as a dangling or something like that, like chain of bones which are sequentially just affecting each other. You're using this hierarchy and recalculating your animation and then working with your animation accordingly. Let's say I'm going to select this one. That is my joint chain. I can animate it in some manner. Maybe I can use the aim button for that, aim function. If you want to see how this animation is made, let me Control Z that. I do have a separate tutorial for this animation specifically. You can buy it, you can analyze it. It is available on my Gumroad page. Alright, let's actually move on. Let's continue working. We still have some things to talk about. IK, inverse kinematics. This is the first button. You can read this button as move 3 or more objects to inverse kinematics. Let's say I have 3 objects over here. Those are completely independent from each other. I press this button, and this animation is going to be transferred to some kind of a system, IK system to be precise. You see it's a bit complicated in hierarchy, and it gives us a locator that controls the first member of this system, and the second locator, which is effectively the pole vector, which controls the elbow. Simply put, it is just an IK system, but it's more about opportunity and ability to apply this IK system. And of course it works on joint chains as well, without any issues and problems. Maybe if you have a finger or a hand, arm, to be precise. You can recalculate your animation on IK if needed. Let me show you an example of a finger. Let's say we have a finger. Doesn't matter what it is. And let's say we want to control this finger. We have two options. You can select three controls. We can apply the IK. You can see that we previously had an animation on this finger, and additionally we now have an IK handle which we can use for some additional motions or additional animations. And we also have this additional locator to control the elbow, so to speak, but just the middle joint, essentially. This is the first option. There is a second one. And why is it like 3 or more objects? Of course, you can use 4 objects, 5 objects, so on and so forth. But if we use 4 or more objects, but in this case, again, the IK handle is going to be IK system is going to be created, but with the 4 or more, it's going to be created in a bit different way. IK software will be present on the first 3 objects. Let's create a fourth object for the IK system. I'm going to create a locator for that. Let's say it's going to be over here. So this object is going to be kind of driver. I'm going to select my controls and the fourth one. Apply the IK. And here there is an interesting thing. You see, I control my IK system through the fourth object, and the inner bone serves as it acts as an internal control for the finger. And this is what you can do. Of course, you can also control the elbow, the full vector control. And the control is carried over, so the entire structure is transferred to the first 3 controls. That's in the case if you need direct control, like having an exact point which you can drag in order to control the IK system. I can delete this one. It was a temporary locator. Okay. You see, you have such a movement. Yeah, I think that's about it. Again, as an illustration for the system, let's take a look at some kind of animation. I have this spinning animation. Let's apply inverse kinematics to this thing. Even though it seems that it's kind of very difficult animation for an inverse kinematic, but you see it works fine. You can tweak it, you can control it, you can edit it to your needs and wants. Of course, there are still limitations, because with IK systems, again, there may be some problems in different scenarios, because there might be kind of a bit too difficult motion for the IK system to pick up, but it's up to you, it's up to the specific case. Let's move on. There are still 2 buttons left. It's inverse IK spline. It's IND, it's independent, and dependent IK spline. Essentially, those buttons, those functions are served in order to get some kind of objects and represent it in the form of IK spline. So kind of self-explanatory, I guess. The only difference between those 2 buttons, those 2 scripts, is that if you use an independent type, then each control is going to be on its own. So it's going to be, each control is independent from each other. And in the dependent mode, they will depend on the first and the last control. Let's say over here we have an example, we have a finger with some kind of animation. I'm gonna create a locator inside because it's for me a bit more convenient. I'm gonna select the controls and the locator. Now I'm gonna click the independent system. You see all the animation is recalculated on this system. And you see, you can take a look at how it works. We can take this locator, delete it, the first one for the system. You see, I'm moving this locator, and all the controls are independent because I can move them separately. I can control the finger part by part, so to speak. If I rotate the system, then yeah, it is rotated in a specific manner. I think it's better suited for animations where you have to have a control for each part of your joint chain. Maybe, let's say, if you have an animation of a tail and its tail it's being dragged on the ground and maybe it's going over some kind of object or goes around some kind of object. So you need to have a specific control for each part of your tail. In this case, yeah, maybe it is quite useful. You see, all of these controls are independent. I'm going to delete it. Let's try attaching the dependent system. I'm going to again create a locator, then I'm going to select all the controls and create a dependent system. After we created the system, we don't need locator anymore. You see, I'm moving everything. I'm moving a locator and it moves everything. So it's being controlled by this one locator as a, in traditional IK manner. In cases when, let's say, you have to maybe animate fingers when they're touching something on the surface or something like that, I think the dependent type is a bit more convenient to use. Because generally fingers are sliding across a surface with they're touching, so it's a bit more realistic, I'd say. You can actually watch your fingers try to touch the surface, maybe press some buttons or stuff like that. Yeah, so here dependent type is more suitable for such animations. But of course you also have the twisting control for this IK system. Yeah, you can see what we have. And you can freely animate anything with this system. And what else can be used? It can be used for, well, of course, fabrics, clothing. You can animate your characters, then you can animate your fabric, as I've shown you previously. Maybe at first you can use the dependent system in order to animate your fabric in a general manner, in order to create a general motion. And then you can create an independent system in order to maybe control your fabric even more, maybe get some intersections, avoid intersections with other objects and stuff like that.